weather, and I'll see you tomorrow night.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's going to be breezy, increasingly so across northern parts of the UK over the next 24 hours. Patchy cloud carried in on that breeze, but with lighter winds and clearer spells further south, we're going to see a chilly night. Now, high pressure is building in from the south, but that's not going to lead to entirely fine conditions across the UK because we're going to continue to see a strong westerly breeze. In fact, it's going to increase over the next few days. And during the early hours of Friday, it will bring some areas of cloud, especially across northern parts of the UK. So with the cloud and the breeze increasing in the north, generally frost-free. Further south, lighter winds and some clear spells will lead to a few fog patches by dawn and temperatures close to, if not a touch below freezing. So a chilly, but for many, bright start across England and Wales, eastern Scotland as well. However, through the afternoon, we're going to see the cloud thicken once again across northern and western parts of the country. Spells of rain increasing as well over western hills. It stays bright towards the east and southeast of England, 8 or 9 Celsius here, whilst despite the cloud further west, we'll see mild air carried through, and that will continue into the start of the weekend. A very mild start to Saturday, a lot of cloud though, and an increasingly strong wind. Gales for northwestern Scotland, heavy rain for the northwest Highlands, and that's really going to mount up through Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Drier further south.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs, medium panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And a very good evening. It's 7 o'clock. It's Farage here on GB News. Yes, the great man, he's back from the jungle. He'll be back hosting the show from Monday. So this is my last show. We've got loads and loads to get through. First of all, some new data from the Home Office showing just 1% of the migrant arrivals in the last 3 years have been deported. Growing ambulance chaos, we've got doctors' strike, another NHS disastrous winter looms. And also a huge row growing about keeping children safe online. All of that, much, much more. It's a big show ahead. But first of all, of course, it's the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Richard, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, police are saying there are some indications why a woman in Norwich may have left her work earlier than usual on the day she went missing. Gaynor Lord was last spotted on CCTV cameras on Friday afternoon, and Norfolk Constabulary say it is likely the 55-year-old may have entered a body of water nearby. The force is saying specialist divers are working in extraordinarily challenging environments as they search the nearby river, and it will take a couple of days or longer to complete that search.
So there's a number of lines of inquiry that we are pursuing, but everything that we know is pointing to a high probability that Gaynor went into the water, and that would be from the CCTV, from the very limited witnesses that we've got available to us at the moment, and other lines of inquiry that we're pursuing about Gaynor's behaviour in the lead up to her disappearance. So at the moment the river is a really key factor for us. Now, it's not to say that other specialist police teams aren't working on other lines of inquiry, because they are, but at the moment you're seeing that intensive effort around the searching of the water and the parks around and some of the other land around this area.
Meanwhile, a missing British boy who's believed to have disappeared 6 years ago has been found in France, Greater Manchester Police say. The boy, spotted in Toulouse yesterday morning, is now a teenager but was just 11 years old when he went missing after leaving the UK to go on holiday to Spain. The force said it's now in touch with the French authorities to put safeguarding measures in place. Now, as you've been hearing throughout today, the Bank of England has held the interest rate at 5.25% for the third time in a row. At Parliament's Treasury Committee meeting last month, the bank's governor said the threat of UK inflation is being underestimated. The head of a trade association says the findings against MP Scott Benton show the need for reform of the lobbying system in Parliament. It comes as the Committee on Standards recommended that Scott Benton be suspended for 35 days from the Commons following a lobbying scandal. The Blackpool South MP was secretly filmed by reporters from The Times offering to leak confidential information to gambling industry chiefs who'd offered him between £2,000 and £4,000 for just 2 days' work. The MP says he didn't breach any rules. And today, the funeral for the former Minister Baroness Kinnock has been taking place. The family of the MEP and wife of ex-Labour leader Lord Kinnock says she was a proud democratic socialist who campaigned for justice and against poverty all her life. She had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 2017. Sir Keir Starmer described her as a true fighter for the Labour Party. He was seen arriving at the ceremony earlier, and he was joined by Gordon Brown, Tony Blair and Sadiq Khan. That's the news on GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Thank you, Polly, and welcome to Farage here at GB News. It's just after 7 o'clock. Now, first of all, a big thank you, because this is a team effort. You may recall last night the story I exposed about the international student visa abuse, breach of the regulations. That came from one of you viewers who dug into the story and then let us know about it, came on to me. So if you've got any other scandals, abuses you think that need investigating, need looking at us, by us presenters and our team, let us know. That's how we can be a great team effort and hold people to account. Now, first up, talking of holding people to account. So some new data has come out of the Home Office. Doesn't appear to happen very often, and when it does, it's rarely good news. Just listen to this. So we've had Since 2020, across the English Channel, some 111,000 people have crossed the channel. Have a guess, how many have actually been assessed, denied and returned? 5%? 4%? Keep going down, my friends. Just 1% in 3 years. And here is a graph that I'll come to in a second. But just 1% of people have been returned, of which 0.7% have been returned to Albania. The Prime Minister's very proud of that. The fact that I broke the story last August, nothing to do with it, of course. But so that means just 0.4 of 1% of non-Albanian migrant arrivals in the last 3 years have been returned from where they came. That doesn't seem to me like very strong performance. But the graph that hopefully will appear on the screen is a different graph. This is the acceptance rate, I hope you can see it, over the last 20 years of asylum applications, which shows extraordinarily, back in 2004, the acceptance rate for asylum applications was less than 20%, less than 1 in 5. 2018, that had risen to 33%. Last year, 2022, right up there, just under 80%, about 76%. So it's more than trebled in the last 20 years. So you might ask, what on earth is going on there? And that's what I'll be digging into with my first guest. But I've got to ask you folks, you at home, what do you think is going on? I mean, asylum seeker applications have trebled in 20 years. Why? Who's to blame? That is my audience question for you to dig into. You know the email, farage@gbnews.com, or use the hashtag. So my first guest is Richard Bartram, Senior Immigration Solicitor, to discuss this. Richard, a very good evening. Thanks for being with us. Thank you. I mean, this data coming out of the Home Office, it's not great performance, is it? Let's be honest. Returning just 1% of those who've arrived in the last 3 years, outside the Albanians, 0.4%. Feels to me that the Home Office is not really doing the job that we're paying them to do.
Well, I think there are a number of answers to that. Firstly, as regards the Albanians, they form 25% or thereabouts of people returned. And that's because, as I think you said, you perhaps broke the story. But anyway, we have an agreement with the Albanian authorities to facilitate that. And perhaps that's what the government are trying to imitate with Rwanda. But Rwanda isn't Albania, so we can come on to that in a moment.
Come on to that in a minute.
Yeah.
But what, I mean, why so slow? It feels to me that is... I mean, that's just hopeless, frankly.
Someone may have been told to get the backlog down, and a way to get the backlog down is to grant. You came up with a figure of 80%. For my little group, my little company, we will be expecting 95, 96, 97%.
Of applications accepted?
In my office, yes.
Wow. So basically that means you're doing a fantastic job on behalf of your clients.
Or that the Home Office...
Or that the Home Office are not competent, not fit for purpose. So actually that's got to the rub of it, because what you're really saying is that perhaps over the last 20 years, the immigration lawyers have got better at interpreting the rules, the regulations, making an ever stronger case. Essentially, you're doing a better job for your client, the asylum seekers, the arrivals, and the Home Office is not as competent as it was 20 years ago at resisting those applications and appeals.
It takes a great deal of time, money and manpower to fight a case, to refuse someone, to go to court, etc. Is there equality of arms? Are there more lawyers than immigration officers? I don't know those statistics.
But something significant has changed in the last 20 years to see a trebling of the rate of acceptances. Or it's just simple political change?
Well, it could be. There'll be a significant impact on the war in Syria and the rise of the Taliban in Afghanistan. Those are just geopolitical factors which are going to drive refugees. The other factors may well be I speculate, a wish to just bring the backlog down, to clear the decks for what comes next, which is inadmissibility, and that's something completely different from sending people to Rwanda, inadmissibility of claims for people who've come from third countries, so to free up the time to deal with the people coming and just essentially to park the people who have already arrived. I'd like to be a fly on the wall in some of those discussions within the Home Office.
And something significant happened this year because at the beginning of the year, the Prime Minister said he was going to get the backlog down. The backlog was well over 100,000. I think it was near 150,000 and rising. And we've now got two immigration ministers, one for lawful immigration and one for unlawful, because the job is so big that essentially one immigration minister wasn't good enough. But the number they've reduced very proudly. Tom Pursglove yesterday announced that they'd got the backlog down from 92,000 at the beginning of the year, sort of long stayers, down to 18,000, sort of a record grant rate. But it seemed to me that it's almost like they're granting an amnesty for huge numbers just in order to meet their target. Is there any, or am I being a bit harsh there?
You would never get anyone from the Home Office to use the word the A word, an amnesty word, not for many a year. And there were some things called backlog clearance, which were effectively...
That sounds like an amnesty to me.
It was never called an amnesty.
Come on, let's be honest amongst friends.
A lot of files were found in a large car park.
Well, talking about finding and losing,
yes,
the Home Office have admitted, of course, that basically they lost some over 17,000 asylum seekers who didn't turn up for their Zoom interview.
Yep.
And because they didn't turn up for the second time, they just basically wrote them off, cancelled the file, stuck it in the bin.
Well, that isn't... Well, it was more likely than not to speak English, and he misses it. He's sent to a hotel with 200 rooms. The next thing that happens is his asylum claim is discontinued, or is discontinued.
But you can't just ignore people and abandon them, and then just basically they just drift into the system and start working illegally, being housed illegally.
You can if you want to get the backlog down.
You can if you want to get the backlog down. You've heard it here, folks. That's what's going on. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's just... How can this be acceptable?
Well, it isn't, because at the end of the day, these people will be encountered and we'll be back in the system. In the interim, they are, as you put it, sleeping in the park or working illegally. They'll have no other choice until they can get back in and they say, I simply didn't receive your invitation letter.
But if they've essentially written it off, which was what Sir Matthew Rycroft, he indicated, then they don't bother again. They've got the backlog down. They don't care. Feels to me there's just a lack of oomph, a lack of effort, a lack of care on behalf of British citizens.
Well, it's a matter of priorities. If we are going to be driven by essentially what I'm going to suggest are sound bites, get the backlog down, stop the boats, rather than come to a joined-up asylum system, deciding who are we going to protect and who are we not going to protect, and then let's focus on the ones we are going to protect and take every action that within the power of the state, if that's what the Parliament and the British people want, to remove the people that we are not going to protect.
It was so predictable. When the Prime Minister said he was going to get the backlog down, we all sort of knew what would happen. There would be a rush through, there would be a sort of a backdoor amnesty. We've had 39,000 claims granted in the year to September, the highest since records began back in 1984. And then it's the whole Rwanda thing, just to finish on, Richard, it's like a sort of dead cat distraction on the side. We spent all that money. Just imagine if we'd spent all that money on a top-quality, world-beating processing team that processed everybody within a few weeks.
Well, £390 million so far is a fair wedge of money.
290, yeah.
290, I'm sorry. I'm sure it'll be 390 before long.
Don't.
Given that
it's unbelievable.
We have promised to provide legal assistance and all sorts to Rwanda, and that bill's only going to go up. I mean, you said dead cat. I would say three-legged donkey in the Grand National.
Maybe what we should be doing, actually, is basically seconding a whole load of you immigration lawyers to replace a bunch of folk in the Home Office to do the job properly, it seems to me. Maybe that's too much like common sense, Richard.
Well, I don't know that, but no, seriously, let's decide what kind of categories of refugees, what refugees we want, or can take if it's about society. So let's just say the French will take 50,000 refugees from a French-speaking country, and we will take 50,000 from southern Cameroon, who are Anglophiles.
The bottom line is we've got to be competent and we've got to be determined to do the job properly. Richard Bartram, thank you so much indeed for your thoughts on that. There we are, my friends. It seems to me that we've basically got a quasi-amnesty programme going on in this year to get the Prime Minister's target to be achieved. My audience question to you, how has that acceptance rate trebled? Who's to blame? You've got the email, send us an email. Coming up after the break, the NHS, a winter of peril ahead. We've got ambulance delays. We've got another junior doctor strike at the worst possible time. All of that and much more on GB News.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like? I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Thank you very much. Welcome back to Farage at GB News. Well, later in the show, we're going to be talking about the huge row that's exploded between the National Crime Agency and Meta, who, of course, own Facebook, about keeping children safe. That is going to be worth waiting for. But the audience reaction is in to my question. So the asylum seeker application rate, the acceptance rate, has trebled in the last 20 years. Who's to blame was my question. Ray says, it's our fault. We're a soft touch. 5-star hotels with benefits, maybe just some 4-star hotels as well, and a visa after a year, a disaster waiting to happen. Ray, you're on the money. Richard says we should drop the great from Great Britain. This country's a disgrace as far as immigration is concerned. I don't want to do that. But, Richard, I know what you mean, your frustration. Robert says, wow, this is strong stuff. Corrupt, leftist, civil servants, that's your answer, says Robert. No messing around, pretty strong feelings. Well, there's some pretty strong feelings going on with the NHS because we've got data coming out about ambulance delays that have increased hugely in recent weeks. There's now some, to wait 30 minutes or more when you arrive at the hospital before you are disembarked into the hospital itself. 1 in 3 patients. Just imagine that. 1 in 3 are waiting over half an hour from when you've arrived at A&E. Doesn't sound like much of a service. That, on top of the member, and then again in the new year, something to look forward to, from the 3rd to the 9th of January, we're back to the strikes. Yes, the BMA junior doctors are striking again. This is not encouraging news. I'm delighted to be joined on the line by Dr. Paul Scott, who's a GP and is chair for the Northern Staffordshire Trust. Dr. Scott, thank you so much for joining me. Not great news. I guess it's always challenging for the NHS in the winter. We know that every winter is a difficult time, but some of this data is pretty shocking. A third of patients arriving at hospital, waiting half an hour in the ambulance before handing over. What's going on there, Doctor?
I think the issue is that the government, the media, the public always seem to look at this from the point of view of what's visible and where, if you like, the symptoms of the problems in the NHS. And the most visible one is A&E and ambulances queuing outside and people having to wait. As a 30-year experienced GP, that actually isn't the problem. The problem, when you look at it, is actually everywhere else. And to start with, general practice, we're 2,200 GPs down compared to 2015. We've had a huge recruitment of less skilled staff who often have to see patients more often before patients eventually get a diagnosis. A 15% increase than before COVID, which is still not getting through the demand. We've also got a 111 system that's really quite risk averse and piles people into hospital as well. A&E itself and the whole hospital sector is operating slower than it did before COVID, operating only at 70 to 80%. Some of this is just the sheer catch-up of the increasingly ill people, but it's
a relentless increase in demand, it sounds like. There is some good news, though, within the data that I've just read, which is that in the last month's waiting list data for operations and treatments actually has basically held flat at about 7.7, 7.8 million. I suppose we should be grateful for small mercies, particularly at this time of the year.
So what your listeners will be interested in what I think are the answers, the answers, and I really hope this sinks in, because the answer isn't just to try and pour money, put a bandage on A&E or get a few more ambulances. The answer is in general practice to allow the money spent on non-doctors to be spent on doctors. There are GPs qualifying now who are actually unemployed because there are no jobs for them. And that just needs a relaxation of the rules. We need better medical filters on 111, so only the people who really need to go to hospital. And we need definitely A&E led by the most experienced doctors. The other bit are nursing homes, the care sector. We need investment there and much better
I think most people, Doctor, recognise that actually it's not more money, it's reform of the processes that you quite rightly being touching on. Let's move on to the forthcoming doctors' strikes, the junior doctors' strikes before Christmas and just after the New Year. I mean, this really is the worst possible time for them to go on strike, regardless of the merits of the case or otherwise. It does seem that they're not exactly going to win any friends or sympathy from the general population.
I think their morale, how they're treated by the NHS, how this country treats junior doctors, they're almost at a level where they're beyond caring. They were offered just 3%. They've lost 25-30% compared to a few years ago in relative income. But money isn't everything. It's how the NHS treats them. They're on inflexible rotas. There are gaps, many gaps in their rotas where they're cross-covering.
So are you really saying that actually they don't care? I mean, if they feel they've got a case, that's one thing. But to go on strike at this time to create maximum damage, maximum angst, at literally the worst time of the year, when lots of other health staff are on holiday, for example, I actually think it's shocking, bordering on selfish.
I understand that, but I think they're thinking in the medium term. So we're getting an NHS that's wrecking its retention of junior doctors. And junior doctors are leaving in droves. Many of them going less than full time. Many of them exploring other countries, as you're aware. The continuation in training rate 2 years after qualification is about 40%. This is absolutely appalling for a country like ourselves.
That is for sure. That retention rate sounds woeful. I just think the timing of this is going to lose a lot of sympathy for the merits of their case. Dr. Scott, thank you so much for your thoughts this evening on Farage on GB News. Really do appreciate that. There's not much good news, I'm afraid, in and around the NHS. Just huge challenges, but I just don't believe it's about the money. I think it's about the waste. I think it's about the way it's managed. I think it's about the processes. You go to most hospitals on a Friday afternoon, there's not much happening. Surely we should be using the facilities, the operating theatres, Friday afternoon, Saturday, Sunday. That's how we get through the backlog. So much to do, so much reform is essential. Talking reform, coming up after the break, we're going to be talking about a huge row about the way they're trying to reform the use of online safety, keeping children safe, between the National Crime Agency, that's got a serious thing or two to say about it, and the group Meta that own Facebook. Don't go anywhere, it's GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, my friends. Well, keeping children safe online is absolutely critical and, frankly, not very easy. It really is very challenging indeed. A massive concern for parents and grandparents and friends alike, and guardians and things. But here's what's going on. There's a massive row between the National Crime Agency, you might wonder why they're getting involved, and the owners of Facebook, a big company called Meta based in the United States, because Meta have decided to basically encrypt, to sort of close off the beginning and the end of messages on Facebook for the first time. And of course, Facebook is hugely used by so many youngsters. And ministers and parents are really, really anxious about this. One minister's described this decision as morally reprehensible. The National Crime Agency has said that it raises serious concerns for safety. They reckon that some 92% of all referrals that the National Crime Agency receives is from Facebook. So just think about that. Meta says it's OK for Facebook, but the National Crime Agency says it's not. And of course, the risk is, the agency is saying that this move could lead to much greater abuse of children and paedophiles sharing horrific images online. Well, I'm delighted to be joined by John Taylor, Online Safety for Schools representative and campaigner. John, thanks for being with us. This is it's so hard to know what's right and what's wrong here. I know the online safety bill has taken ages and ages. What's your take on this? Is the situation, is it about the encryption or is it about something else that you're concerned about?
I suppose it's a bit of both. Encryption or end-to-end encryption has been about now for some time, and actually Meta and Facebook are quite sort of last to the party. They've been doing it with their own WhatsApp now for some years, iMessenger. They've got end-to-end encryption, so they're actually quite late to the party for encrypting messages on people using their messaging service on that platform. But of course, yeah, any platform that's used by predatory paedophiles, then really they should do what they can to assist with law enforcement. And of course, here we have law enforcement saying, well, if you're going to encrypt it end to end, then we're not going to get the details that you're actually currently sending us. Now, it has to be said that Meta have said we're going to continue, and should we see any images that are being sent from individuals, then we will continue to report to NITMIC, the National Centre for Missing Exploited Children in America, who then forward the details onto the NCA, who then forward it on to local forces.
Because the numbers, John, are huge. I mean, people will be really shocked to hear that the National Crime Agency arrests some 800 people a month regarding child abuse alone, safeguarding over 1,200 children. I mean, these are massive numbers. These are many hundreds every single week. I was shocked when I read this data.
The funny thing is, so was I. The reason I say I was, because I've spent obviously 15 years investigating these crimes and actually going online in an undercover capacity. But then we've got to look at the fact that these are 800. Now, means it's 800 pieces of information regarding individuals who have been exchanging indecent images of children using the internet. Now, that isn't just coming from Facebook. That will be coming from the likes of the FBI, Homeland Security, and NITMIC for these individuals who are using every single platform that we can think of, including file sharing systems, which is where the crux and the main route will be.
And John, to help parents, because it's so hard, have you got some top tips for Christmas to help parents try and keep their own children safe?
Well, yes, if we step away from where we are with the NCA and Meta, when you consider a child is going to get a device which is going to be a smartphone, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation, Xbox, we know that they're going to want to go Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite, Instagram, etc., etc., etc. If you're going to do that, then fine. There are age restrictions, normally around about the 12, 13 mark. WhatsApp is 16. Stick to them and be involved with your child. Get to know what your child's doing. Don't rely simply on a child learning for themselves. We don't do that for any other aspect of their lives. Don't do it here.
That's a really, really good tip. Actually, keep a close eye on it. It's not easy. Absolutely not easy. And often the children don't like sort of having parents looking over. They like to be secret amongst their friends. But I think, John, that is great advice. News in today, John, that I just want to tell you is my sort of what the Farage moment. The Prime Minister, you'd think he's got better things to do, but maybe not. He's actually going to have a consultation in the new year to ban something else. Yes, he's actually thinking about consulting over banning social media for the under-16s. Now, some people might say, actually, that's a really good thing based on what you've just said. What are your thoughts there, John? I mean, is that actually heading down the right direction, possibly?
People who've listened to me talk to schools over the last 10 years, especially parents, will know that I've said, if we equated this to cigarettes and alcohol, then yeah, social media, not until I've actually said 18. But that's unrealistic. It's uncontrollable. This government doesn't control the likes of Meta, doesn't control the likes of TikTok or the most popular platforms. That is not going to happen. So, well, yeah, he can say that as an opinion, but as fact, what we should be doing is spending far more money on actually getting more education and awareness to children and parents.
John, that's really helpful. Thank you so much indeed, John Taylor, for those thoughts and some top tips there for keeping your children safe online. It's really important, and the consequences if you get it wrong, I'm afraid, are horrific. Now, my second What the Farage moment, I have to say, made me a little bit frustrated. Yes, workers at the public sector agency called DEFRA that looks after farmers and things, they're running a big petition. Yes, they want a 4-day week, but they still want to be paid for 5 days. How does that work? How's that going to improve productivity if you're working 4 days, but you're going to be paid for 5 days? That feels like almost like a 20% pay increase. Maybe that's what the doctors want. Jack Kellum is the spokesman for the 4-day week campaign. He's down the line. Jack, a very good evening to me. Help me here. I mean, this seems like a disaster for productivity, a disaster for cost increases. What am I missing, Jack?
So I think to the opposite, this is really, really exciting. So this is a chance now for the UK to be leading the way in workplace innovation, drawing on what is really successful growing evidence of the benefits of a shorter working week for no loss in pay. So the UK has been a real success story in this. So in 2022, we had a major trial, 60 companies, thousands of workers moved to a shorter working week, just as this petition demands, for no loss in pay. We saw business performance stay very similar despite that reduction. We saw massive increases in staff well-being. We saw significant decreases in levels of stress. People find it easier to combine childcare with
I'm
their
sure,
work.
but that's all very well. Where does it stop? So maybe I want a 3-day week and be paid for 5 days. And then we'll be down to 2 days. I mean, I've got a graphic somewhere, I think, that I can show you showing public sector productivity. I mean, in the private sector, it's up to the boss. But here is a graph. The flat line at the bottom, surprise, surprise, is public sector productivity going nowhere over many, many years. And here's a public sector agency saying, I want to be paid for 5 days, but only work for 4 days, Jack.
Look, we've seen 4-day weeks be a massive driver of productivity, whether that's in the private sector, whether that's now in the public sector. We've seen South Cambridgeshire recently, County Council making a similar move. They've had some really great success early on with their trial of a 4-day working week. And what we find is, look, we have a crisis of overwork in this country. We're now learning working longer hours is not being more productive. People get burnt out, they're stressed, they're not managing their time efficiently maybe in those businesses. Having that focus of reducing working hours can be really a powerful way of driving up.
I tell you what I could buy, Jack. I could buy that if you say, I want to do my 5 days work, the same number of hours, in 4 days. That I could buy. Is that a deal?
Well, I think it's really important we keep the same level of pay. If people are producing the same amount of output or improving it,
but if you get a 20% pay increase, your productivity is going to collapse.
That's not necessarily the case at all, though. We've seen this across businesses now. This is why the private sector has led with this.
Yeah, but I've just shown you the proof. I've just shown you the proof. The private sector drives up, but the public sector's flat.
Well, exactly. But for private sector, we're moving towards the 4-day working week. That's why it's been adopted there, right? We've seen businesses really across the world. That's the UK, the US, New Zealand as well. Unilever recently, Microsoft in Japan. They're making these moves because they see the effects it has on productivity.
But you're talking about private sector businesses.
Private sector.
I understand that's a choice for private sector businesses. I get all that. I'm not buying it for the public sector, but Jack, good try. Thank you very much indeed. Jack resisted my deal to be paid the same as long as you actually do the same number of hours across 4 days. Anyway, the truth is the economy is flat. It's going nowhere. In fact, even worse. In the last month, it's fallen. We'll be talking about all of that straight after the break. Don't go anywhere.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you 3.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back to Farage. Now, big interview tomorrow from 6 a.m. on The Breakfast Show. We've got the mother of the murdered toddler, James Bulger, calling for the parole system to be completely and utterly overhauled, because one of James's killers, John Venables, was denied freedom by the parole board this week. After a 30-year fight to keep him behind bars, Denise Fergus told GB News that she has, for now at least, finally got some justice for her son. You'll not want to miss that tomorrow from 6 a.m. With Eamon and Anne. Now, back to my show this evening and the last segment. We've got to talk about what's going on in the economy because, of course, we had this week, just yesterday, bad news on the economy. The data for October show that the economy, it's not growing, it's not flat. No, in 1 month, it fell by 0.3%. And for the last 3 months, it's basically flat. And this is really serious because we've got the state spending over 45% of all economic spending. And that's paid for by taxes. We have to create some growth. Now, many people say, well, rely on the Office for Budget Responsibility. What's their forecast? Let's have a look at that. Well, I'm delighted to be joined in the studio by Christian Niemitz, who's the head of political economy at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Christian, a very good evening to you. Not great news on the economy, and growth is so important. Far too often we hear lots of stuff from politicians, but they rarely talk about growth and actually delivering it. And what troubles me, you look at this graph that I think we're going to put on the chart now. Look to the right-hand side, folks. We're basically where the blue line, which is about 100% debt relative to the size of the economy. Look at that black line. That is the forecast OBR debt increase over the next 30, 40 years, going completely through the roof to record high levels. You might say, well, I'm not worried about that 30 years. I'm worried about the next 3 months. But, Christian, there's no growth in the system now, and the OBR is forecasting growth over the next year or two. This is actually very bad news indeed.
It absolutely is, yes. And the thing is, we should actually be booming right now. We've only just about recovered to pre-COVID level. We've got a lot to make up for, and we should be really in a booming economy. Now, a lot of people are blaming the Bank of England's decision to keep their rates as high as they currently are, but by historic standards, that is not such an unusual level. In the 90s, in the early 2000s, those would have been completely normal levels.
They would have been, that's right. But they have kept the rate at 5.25%. I think they've had 14 consecutive increases until the last few months. But it takes time for that to trickle through. If we want to create some growth, then actually reducing interest rates will be part of the package. Mm-hmm. But, Christian, we've got the highest taxes for 70 years. We've got the highest levels of regulations. Government spending is at record levels. I just touched on 45%. We've got mass immigration that we've never had before. And we've got, factor all of that, and then we've got the cost of net zero, yes, which we've never had before. So where's the growth going to come from that's going to get the debt back to acceptable levels?
At the moment, from nowhere. The problem is...
From nowhere?
No, I don't see much. I mean, it's not going to be... This may not be technically a recession. It may just be a period of anemic growth, but that will be bad enough. It is still, by historic standards, the economy has barely grown since about 2007. So I moved here in 2007. I don't have the impression that I live in a richer country now than the one I moved to back then. And that is a very long period of near stagnation. I think that the basic problem is actually fairly simple. I read stories pretty much every day about some group somewhere, some obstructionist group, blocking some form of economic activity, whether that's house building, infrastructure, business premises, offices, retail, energy, whatever it is. There's always someone somewhere objecting. None of it catastrophic on its own, but it adds up.
But those on the left, the Labour Party, Socialists, they'll say if you invest more in public services, where, by the way, we've just proven that the productivity is completely flat, then you'll get growth because you'll get higher quality of life and things with higher quality public services. What do you say to them?
Well, we would see that by now. Public spending in peacetime has never been higher on a consistent basis than it is now. And so this idea, a lot of people on the left have this idea that public spending is exceptionally low in Britain, which it really isn't. It's a fairly normal OECD level. Of course, you can always find some examples where they spend even more, but then they get other things right.
But the truth is, taxes are at a 70-year high, and public spending is 20 years ago, public spending as a relative to the size of the economy was about 35%, give or take.
Yeah.
It's now north of 45%. So it's gone through the roof, and yet actually most people would say public services are worse, which surely proves that actually that graph about public sector productivity is probably actually going down. Seems the more money you throw at it, the worse it gets.
Well, yeah, exactly. If that was the way to generate growth, then we would now be in a booming economy. Because it really is at a peacetime record high.
Now, you understand this stuff. So those factors we've sort of had, but the two new factors, mass immigration that we're seeing in recent years, despite promises to bring it down, and then the impact of the costs of net zero, which wasn't properly costed, and we don't know, frankly, whether it's 2 trillion, 3 trillion or 5 trillion. It's in the trillions, that we do know. How significant are those two separate factors being imposed on us as a nation, as a population, as communities at the same time?
I'm less bothered about the immigration side of that, because as long as immigration is immigration into the labour market, into the economy, as opposed to the welfare system, that can actually boost growth or at least be neutral, because those people don't just work here, they also spend money.
Yeah, but hang on, but if the economy is flatlining and there's no prospects of growth, if you divide that same size economy by another 1 million people every year, we're all worse off. That is
okay,
worse.
but them just being here means they will do something that is in some way
Yeah, but they're doing
productive.
something and the economy's flatlining, so that's not working.
Well, it's not the way to boost the economy, or not on a per capita basis, but it doesn't have to be a problem either. It can be neutral, generally.
Yeah, I don't want neutral, I want growth, Christian.
Yes, that has to come from somewhere else. That has to come from taking away power from the professional.
Now, the left will say, those who are pro-net zero, pro-renewable energy, all that good stuff, will say it's green jobs, the growth is coming in from net zero, the Labour Party's going to borrow tens of billions of pounds to invest in that. Are you buying that stuff or not?
No, not at all. Because by that logic, you could also say you could hire 100,000 people to have them dig holes, and then another 100,000 people to fill up the holes again, and then you could say, I have created 200,000 jobs. But what we want to create isn't jobs. It's prosperity. Of course, you can inflate the size of the green economy by subsidising it, but that money,
subsidies come from the taxpayer.
Yes,
I don't want to do that. Subsidies breeds complacency. I want to restrict the labour supply. I want to restrict the migration numbers so that actually either the cost of labour goes up, which forces businesses to invest in capital. That's how you get an improvement of productivity and growth. That's the way to drive it forward, and to cut out government waste, and then you can reduce taxes.
Yeah, I mean, you could just raise the salary threshold on the migration side. That would be a measure where you can...
How does that help productivity?
Well, because that would mean you have... raise the salary threshold. So
raise the salary threshold from...
Yes,
okay.
So that you have to earn a certain level before you can...
And the government's talked about that. The question, I guess, is whether or not they actually deliver it. But for me, it's there's too much waste, too much taxes, and it's catastrophic. And if we don't get some growth, Christian, we are heading to a very bad place. Christian Niemitz, thank you so much indeed for being with us, sharing those thoughts. It's not easy, it's not good news, but, of course, the next show will have all the answers because it's being hosted by Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. Good evening, Jacob. Have you got the answers to create some growth? I mean, yesterday's news was bad. The Bank of England news today, not great.
Well, I think the Bank of England was too slow to increase interest rates and been too slow to cut them. The Bank of England is always behind. Yesterday's news will be revised. Whatever happens, that will not be the figure. That we've had a terrible track record of revisions to GDP, so you don't really know where you stand with one.
No, but it's not a great trend, is it? The last 3 months is 0. The last month is minus 0.3. I mean, it's heading south, not north, Jake.
But we've had such enormous revisions, so we keep on being told we're bottom of the list of G7 nations, and then 2 years later you find out actually we were near the top. So I wouldn't worry too much about those.
I'm anxious, but you're obviously not. What's coming up on the show?
Right. What I'm going to be talking about is an extraordinary performance by the chief executive of Aviva, somebody called Amanda Blank, who appeared before a select committee yesterday and said if any job were to be given to a white man, it had to be signed off by her personally to encourage diversity. And this seems to me straightforward discrimination.
Absolutely.
I can't believe it's legal. If it is, it's outrageous. And it seems to me she's failing in her fiduciary duty because her job's to make money for her shareholders, not pontificate about her slightly tiresome lefty views.
If you're a white male, you're not going to have much chance at Aviva, it sounds like. Jacob, that sounds like a fantastic show. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. That's my last show for the moment. Nigel is back on Monday with lots of news and action. But first of all, it's the weather.
Looks like things are heating up. boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's going to be breezy, increasingly so across northern parts of the UK over the next 24 hours. Patchy cloud carried in on that breeze, but with lighter winds and clearer spells further south, we're going to see a chilly night. Now, high pressure is building in from the south, but that's not going to lead to entirely fine conditions across the UK because we're going to continue to see a strong westerly breeze. In fact, it's going to increase over the next few days. And during the early hours of Friday, it will bring some areas of cloud, especially across northern parts of the UK. So with the cloud and the breeze increasing in the north, generally frost-free. Further south, lighter winds and some clear spells will lead to a few fog patches by dawn and temperatures close to, if not a touch below freezing. So a chilly, but for many, bright start across England and Wales, eastern Scotland as well. However, through the afternoon, we're going to see the cloud thicken once again across northern and western parts of the country. Spells of rain increasing as well over western hills. It stays bright towards the east and southeast of England, 8 or 9 Celsius here, whilst despite the cloud further west, we'll see mild air carried through, and that will continue into the start of the weekend. A very mild start to Saturday. A lot of cloud, though, and an increasingly strong wind. Gales for northwestern Scotland, heavy rain for the northwest Highlands, and that's really going to mount up through Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Drier further south.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Yet another institution in the private sector has been overrun with anti-meritocratic, politically correct collectivist nonsense. The chief executive of the insurance giant Aviva, Amanda Blank, has told the Treasury Committee that she has to sign off all senior white male recruits. And this is all in the name of the modern-day religion known as diversity. Meanwhile, the Business Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, has been embroiled in a row over transgender rights as she told the Women and Equalities Committee that single-sex spaces must be protected because there are more predators than there are trans people. Is it time to give young people what they want? New polling reported in the world's greatest newspaper, The Times, has suggested a third of young people believe dictatorship is a better system of governance than democracy. Perhaps we could send them all to Venezuela. Plus, as the COVID inquiry continues with its tedious proceedings, I'll be joined by the lone voice of reason in the wilderness of hysteria, Professor Carol Sikora, the world-leading authority on cancer, who was willing to challenge lockdowns when it was highly contentious to do so. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my most intellectual panel this evening, the editor of Conservative Home, Paul Goodman, GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. As always, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's what you've all been waiting for, the news of the day, with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, our top story from the GB newsroom tonight is that Norfolk police are saying they're